This time, I move that this House insist and appoint a committee of conference on House Bill 911.
The back and forth between the House and the Senate over state budget priorities continues as the House Appropriations Chair sends the bill to a conference committee. Good evening and welcome to Lawmakers on this day 36 of the legislative session. I'm Donna Lowry in Atlanta. We'll have more on the budget issues coming up. A Senate bill would change the state's law that restricts new teen drivers from having their peers in the vehicle with them in their first 6 months on the road. Later in the show, lawmakers join us in the studio to talk about both sides of that issue. Also tonight, we're going to look deeper into mental health issues in Georgia, including the increase in suicides in rural areas and the spike in issues involving crime related to substance abuse. Coming up, my expansive interview with the Commissioner of DBHDD, Judy Fitzgerald, who offers glimpses of hope in the midst of some of the state's struggles delivering help in the mental health community. But first, with just a few days left until the end of the session, our Capitol correspondent Brenda Waters is keeping us busy, keeping up with all that's going on at the Gold Dome. Brenda?
Hey, Donna. House Bill 911, better known as the state fiscal year 2023 budget, is doing a lot of traveling between the House and the Senate chambers. Last week, the Senate passed their amended version of HB 911. The Senate kept most of the House's language, but gave raises to certain state employees and financial support to improve third-grade reading levels and foster care. The bill went back to the House and came up for a vote this morning. This is how things went.
Now, this time, I move that this House insist and appoint a committee of conference on House Bill 911.
Chairman England has moved that this House disagree to the Senate substitute to House Bill 911.
The House moved to appoint a conference committee to discuss the bill with the Senate.
This House has insisted the chair appoints Chairman England of the 116th, Leader Burns of the 159th, and Speaker Pro Tem Jones as the 47th as a committee of conference on House Bill 911.
Another priority that has a strong commitment from Governor Kemp and the First Lady is their fight against human trafficking.
SB 461 simply adds the serious offense of human trafficking onto the list of offenses only bailable before a superior court judge. This brings human trafficking into alignment with other serious crimes and validates the heinous nature of those acts.
Senate Bill 461 passed unanimously. Often school board meetings get out of control, or parents claim they don't know when those meetings are being held. Senate Bill 588 addresses that.
So Senate Bill 588 requires that local boards of education publish the notice of their regular monthly meetings on their principal public website in a prominent place, so that parents will have adequate notice of when those meetings are taking place. The bill also requires that local boards of education adopt rules of conduct for their public hearings, and that local boards publish those rules of conduct also in a prominent manner on their websites.
The bill states parents can disagree at school board meetings, but not disrupt them. SB 588 passed 129 to 41. Two more representatives have now joined that long list of those not seeking re-election. Representative Heath Clark told the House he is leaving to spend more time with his wife and children, and especially his mother.
My mom, I want to thank her. In that first campaign that we had, there was two people that I knew were going to show up with me every day to knock on doors. One was my wife, and one was my mom. And she's recently been diagnosed with cancer.
Representative Mike Walensky, who was in his office for just 3 years, thanked many of his colleagues today, including Representative Calvin Smyre, better known as the Dean.
Dean Smyre, it's been an honor to serve with you. I've learned so much from you, learned how to be a great Democrat, how to work with both sides. I loved telling you I was going to say something, you would say, don't say that, and I wouldn't.
In the Senate today, Georgians may be one step closer to assessing medical cannabis, where House Bill 1425 was passed unanimously.
This is the exact same bill that we passed, we passed out of the Senate in the form of Senate Bill 609. So basically, this expands the information that available to the public, and it also requires the commission to get your job done by May 31st.
Donna, that's my Capitol Report. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Brenda. The pandemic has become a wake-up call on the critical need for mental health services and support across Georgia. That's why Republican leaders came into this session with a mission to solve some of the issues that place Georgia near the bottom of all states when it comes to delivering mental health services. Late this evening, the Senate Health and Human Services Committee passed the Mental Health Parity Act, HB 1013. Tonight, we're going to learn more about the challenges faced by the agency that oversees the state's programs, the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Disabilities. I spoke earlier today to DBHDD's Commissioner Judy Fitzgerald in an extensive interview about a range of issues, starting with the good news amid the mental health crisis. People are talking about it.
It is a time for people to be talking about mental health. So I think really what I want folks to know, it's both a time of challenge and a time of opportunity. And when I say challenge, I think it's been widely reported, both in the state of Georgia and nationally, about the increased demand for mental health services. What we know is throughout the pandemic and the challenges that people were facing, anxiety and uncertainty, that there were widespread reports about increased concerns about people's mental well-being. So that's the challenge, that unprecedented demand in the face of workforce shortages that where healthcare has been particularly hard hit. But I also want to underscore the opportunity here, because for those of us who've been in mental health and behavioral health for a long time, it feels like for the first time we're beginning to break down stigma barriers, and that people are beginning to recognize that mental health is absolutely essential to people's overall well-being. So here in the state of Georgia, with legislative focus and budget focus, it's really an opportunity for people to understand and underscore the importance of mental health.
You're dealing with everything from people who have mental health challenges to substance abuse issues and everything in between and all of that. What areas do you think you have the most need, or is it all across the board?
It is all across the board. So you've mentioned we serve as the state's public safety net, and this is an important point because that is our highest responsibility. People with serious and persistent mental illness, people with substance use disorders, and people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, all across our state. So, and we're prioritizing individuals who are at the highest level of need, and especially those who are uninsured. So that's our top focus. So it's really some of our most vulnerable citizens. So every day we've got a workforce dedicated to that population and providers throughout the state who are really focused. And really, I do have to say, the needs are everywhere right now. Most particularly what we're seeing, and I think what people are hearing about in the public, is people who find themselves in crisis. So that's probably where the sharpest focus is right now. How do we make sure that individuals in crisis can have an adequate response from the state?
Let's talk about some of the workforce challenges that you have within your department.
Yeah, so it's important to tell it like it is, I think, really understand the scope and breadth of the challenge. And it's been very real for us in DBHDD. So what that means, most pointedly, across our 5 state hospitals where we employ, it's our state employees that are running those state hospitals, we experienced unprecedented workforce challenges. And in fact, I reported in my budget hearing that since the beginning of the pandemic, we had lost over 1,116 state employees in our hospital system. So I want to pause there. That's a big number. I know sister agencies have also experienced really decimating workforce shortages, but I want to say a couple of things about it. First, I want to also acknowledge, while we lost that large number, thousands of others have stayed. And they stayed because they're dedicated to the mission and they really saw a pathway. And here was a really exciting thing that happened. As folks now know, Governor Kemp led the effort to have a cost of living increase for state employees. We are so grateful for that. This is a game changer for state employees, especially those who are working at the front lines, the lowest paid staff. A $5,000 increase is a measurable and marked increase for them, and we're very excited and really optimistic that this is going to have a significant impact on retention of our current workforce.
And part of that pipeline is looking for forgivable loans for people who are interested in coming into the kind of positions that you need.
Exactly. This is really hard work, whether it's in our state hospital or in a community provider organization. Dealing with and serving people who are challenged with serious mental illness or substance use disorders, it's really hard work, but it's also incredibly rewarding work for people who like to help people, clinically, social workers, and nurses, psychiatrists. We need all those folks as part of our team. So we're trying to find ways, as you say, to incentivize people who might want to study, and really also identifying what are the things that make these jobs rewarding and doable, and how can we create work environments where people feel like they're touching lives, they're impacting lives, and they're driving people and facilitating recovery. That's really what brings the reward of working in the field.
Yeah. We've had the opioid settlement dollars or tobacco settlement dollars. Tell us about that and what that might mean.
Yes, so excited to report about this, because here's the hard news, is that during the pandemic, we know that in Georgia and across the country, we're facing a record number of overdose deaths. And we believe those are preventable. With the right services and the right access and the voice of recovery, we believe that we can really impact this. So the opioid settlement, we've received our first payment for opioid settlement funds. What that means tangibly, $11 million coming to the state. DBHTD has the great responsibility of putting that out on the ground, opening up treatment avenues for people in need. So specifically, what we imagine with those first $11 million will be investing more funds in detoxification beds, right? When people are at that worst moment of crisis, making it easy to get help. And then as they progress there, particularly where opioid use is involved, the evidence-based treatment that we use is called medication-assisted treatment. And so we're investing a lot of funds making MAT available throughout the state. And then, of course, we're going to invest some funds in anti-stigma campaigns, reminding everybody, once again, it's okay to seek help. Here's how you would get help. And here's the other good news, Donna, is we anticipate with the opioid settlement agreement, there are hundreds of millions more dollars on the way. Our job will be turn that into treatment, access, and awareness. And so I'm excited about the opportunity there to really tackle what has become a pandemic of its own.
I know another area that we have seen an increase in is in terms of suicide. So let's talk about what things may be in place to help.
Yeah, thanks. So it's a difficult issue to talk about. But something important that's happening is people are beginning to talk about suicide and understanding that talking about it is part of the healing. So most important, well, I want to say first what we saw happening in Georgia, because again, it's important to name what we see happening. Last year, we actually saw an overall reduction in suicides in Georgia. But we saw an increase in a very specific area, and that was in rural Georgia. And this is a great concern to us, I would say. Rural Georgians, and especially youth, because across the nation we saw increases in youth as young as age 5 to 11, and then up through the teen years showing up in emergency departments because of their mental health concerns. So it's important to know that help is on the way. I want to tell you about what I think is the biggest change that's coming. This is a transformation of our system. This is a national change, and this is the implementation of 988. So this is a federal law has now designated that in July of this year, the 3-digit dialing number, 988, so think how that sounds like 911, but 988 is going to be the suicide and crisis lifeline for people with mental health and substance use emergencies. So what we've been doing here in Georgia, as other states have as well, preparing for the initiation of 988 as a 3-digit dial number. Here's the great news. People in crisis, possibly at the lowest point in their life when they shouldn't have to think, what's the number, how do I get help, can call this 3-digit number 988 and they'll be directly connected to a trained professional on the other end who can help. Now I want to be specific, 988 is national. What's going to happen here in Georgia, and what I'm pleased to tell folks is the number that we currently use in Georgia, folks have come to know GCAL, our Georgia Crisis and Access Line, and we get thousands of calls weekly to the Georgia Crisis and Access Line. Come July, if people dial 988 for themselves or for someone else who's having an emergency, if they dial that number from Georgia, it's going to be directed to GCAL.
I want to thank Commissioner Fitzgerald for that interview. We will post it on gpb.org. Coming up, a look at changing how soon new teen drivers can have their peers join them in the vehicle when they're driving, and more. This is Lawmakers on GPB.
Cigna is a proud partner of Georgia Public Broadcasting and Georgia Lawmakers. Cigna's mission is to improve the health, well-being, and peace of mind of those we serve. More at Cigna.com to learn how you can help support your employees' physical and emotional well-being.
Lawmakers is made possible by Georgia Farm Bureau. With over 80 years of helping everyone understand the importance of agriculture in our state. After all, ag is Georgia's #1 industry. Food and fiber production represents over $74 billion in output of Georgia's strong economy. The Georgia Farm Bureau legislative team works to represent producers across Georgia at the state capitol during the session and year-round. Georgia Farm Bureau, the voice of Georgia farmers.
Georgia Humanities, connecting people and communities across Georgia to encourage conversation, education, and understanding. Find out more at www.georgiahumanities.org.
We are the Southern Environmental Law Center. At SELC, we not only take on the toughest environmental challenges, we win, forcing the removal of more than 250 million tons of toxic coal ash, defeating repeated attempts to bring offshore drilling to our coasts, and securing clean air and water protections for communities across our region. Your most powerful environmental defender is rooted right here in the South.
Welcome back to Lawmakers. We're going to talk now to lawmakers about bills dealing with young drivers and PTSD for first responders. Joining me are Democratic Representative Greg Kennard of Lawrenceville and Republican Senator Frank Ginn of Danielsville in Madison County. And so welcome to Lawmakers.
Great to be with you.
Chairman Ginn, I'm going to start with you. You're chairman of the Senate Transportation Committee, and you have a bill that would remove some of the restrictions from teen drivers. It would allow new drivers to have a young person in the car who is not a family member. Currently, a non-family member has to be a certain age. So you want to change that. Tell us where this comes from.
Had a constituent call with a concern. His 16-year-old granddaughter had to come down Lookout Mountain one night around Christmas after dark. And, you know, it's a little unnerving to put a 16-year-old behind the wheel, and especially when they can't have somebody in the vehicle with them that's not an immediate family member. And so when you look at it, I'll tell you that today, we talked about this in House Rules, I call it the Good Neighbor Bill. You know, not everybody lives in Metro Atlanta. I live out in what one of my former colleagues would say the hinterland is. And my 91-year-old neighbor, if he needed a ride to for a doctor's appointment, a ride to the grocery store, said unfortunately, because he's my neighbor, if my daughter was 16, just got her license, she couldn't go with him to the grocery store or to the doctor's office. As a matter of fact, said the current law doesn't allow for your aunt or your uncle to be in the car with a 16-year-old driver, new driver. You have to be an immediate family member, and that's a challenge. And for me, what I want to try to do is relax that just a little bit. I don't want to. Joshua's Law has done a lot of things to save a lot of kids, and I don't want to do anything to exasperate the situation. But for me, when I look at where we're at, I think that we can do it safely so that another adult, somebody that's 21 years of age or older, could be in with that 16-year-old driver. So this piece of legislation would allow for that teen to be able to continue to drive with an adult that is not necessarily an immediate family member.
Yeah, so I know when you first started this, though, you didn't have that 21. You changed, this went through a few iterations here.
A little bit of Scribner's error, said and I didn't catch it, I apologize, said one of the things that we do in the legislative process down at the Capitol is we call it perfecting legislation. So when you start with an idea, here's what I want to do, hey, there's a lot more brains on the other side of this mouth than there are on the backside. So for me, I like working with my colleagues to try to improve legislation and catch things that we need to do to make life better for Georgia. And that's what it's all about. That's what we're trying to do at the Capitol, is to improve our citizens' lives.
Yeah, so I know when this came into committee, Representative Kennard, you had some concerns. Tell us how you were feeling and how you feel now.
Sure, I did. When I was a Georgia teenage driver, I got my license in 1982. Georgia was about half the size it is now, and Gwinnett County, where I was raised and still live, only had 200,000 people. Now, Georgia is 11 million people, almost a million in Gwinnett, so we have a lot more traffic on the road. So, me raising my 3 teenage daughters and them getting their license, that process happened about 8-10 years ago. I was very comfortable with how Joshua's Law sat at the moment, and even friends who had similar aged children, we were very comfortable with it as it sits exactly now. So Joshua's Law says that for the first 6 months, you can only have the immediate family members in the car, and in the next 6 months, you can have a 21-year-old peer. The first iteration that came to motor vehicles lowered that standard to another teenage passenger, another 16-year-old, and I was not very comfortable with that. But as it often happens, the House takes a Senate bill and perfects it and makes it better. So we were proud to do that for you, Senator Ginn. But the second substitute that came, I voted for it in the committee, and I'm comfortable with where it sits now.
Yeah, so it did pass in the House Motor Vehicles Committee favorably by substitute. So you're feeling really good about this. You're feeling good as it goes before the full House.
Well, you never feel good until you get the governor's signature on there. So for me, I try to respond to my constituents, and I tell people, hey, if you live in Georgia, you're a constituent. If you live in the 47th district, you decide how long I serve in the Senate. And so for me, when we look, we're always trying to make life for all our Georgia citizens better. When we start talking about safety and public safety and who's out there on the road, one of the things that's kind of interesting, somebody brought up today in the Rules Committee, they said, well, is it right for us to teach driver's ed or let somebody drive at 16 years of age? And, I'm not here to debate that situation, but for me, I can promise you, if you never drive, you're never going to have an accident. And so when we start looking, there's got to be a time when you learn how to drive. And at a certain age, your brain is like a sponge and you're really good. Well, you got to get to a certain maturity. And I think 16 is a good number. Said for 15-year-olds get a learner's license and they're driving with an adult, so usually the parent. Said, but in this case, I think that what we can do is have one non-related adult, 21 years or older, in the car, and that's why I nickname it the good neighbor bill, because if your neighbor needed a ride somewhere or here's where we go, you can do that. And I'll be honest with you, I also talked about the fact that some of us are better teachers at driver's ed than others. Matter of fact, one of the owners of a driver's ed school here in Atlanta, he was promoting the bill. He likes the bill. Said but I think about there's times when you may have a family member that doesn't have that educational relationship with their child, where it might be good for an aunt or an uncle to take in and help them with that. So for me, there's a lot of opportunities. I don't think it's going to endanger the public any more than we already are. I know that, you know, when I was 16, it was always a challenge to, okay, I got to do all these different things. So there's a lot of things going on in this world.
Yeah, and I think the big concern was that there'd be a bunch of teenagers in a car. I remember covering the Joshua's Law, and I remember we had quite a few of these accidents where there was more than one teen in a car, and then, you know.
Don't want to see that happen.
Yeah.
That's not where we want to go, and
deaths.
that's
Okay.
I agree with you 100%.
Okay, so I want to change gears a little bit with you, Representative Kennard. Kennard, you're sponsoring a bill, HB 855, and that would cover, we're going to talk about first responders a little bit and the PTSD that they might suffer. Tell us a little bit about where this comes from for you.
Sure. I was contacted by one of my local county law enforcement officers that really brought some light to this issue. As it sits now, if a first responder experiences PTSD in conjunction with a physical injury, workers' comp will cover that as a compensable claim. But if it's a standalone PTSD injury, standalone psychological injury, it does not. What was surprising to me was the fact that a police officer is more likely to die by suicide than in the line of duty. And we're seeing this across the board with all of our first responders, law enforcement, firefighters, paramedics. They're experiencing such trauma on the job, in the line of duty, with traumatic situations that they live with every day, and they're having to process. And you're not unaffected when you see the things they see and you hear the things they hear. So a lot of them are just having to basically stuff and suppress their emotions and how they're feeling about seeing these experiences, and it's taking a toll on them psychologically. And it needs to be addressed. There needs to be treatment offered. And so what HB 855 does, it says we're going to open up the workers' comp system to address that. Right now, a first responder would have to come out of their own pocket to treat PTSD. And they would have to take their own personal leave. The officer I spoke to spent $20,000 when she saw her friend, her colleague die in her arms 4 years ago. She got well, she got healthy, she processed this pain, but it took $20,000 out of her own pocket to seek treatment, and she burned all of her personal leave to address this.
But if she had been injured physically, she would have received workers' comp.
Exactly.
So that's the difference there. And so in terms of claiming the compensation, it excludes mental health struggles like addiction, though, with what you're talking about, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so it wouldn't involve any of that.
No.
Where's the bill going right now in terms of
Well, we
things?
had a committee hearing, and it was compelling. The room was filled with testimonies of first responders, firefighters, law enforcement, paramedics that came and gave their own personal experiences, and family members who had lost a loved one who was a first responder because of this situation. And so it was heard, it was compelling, it was riveting. At the end of the day, the chairman decided to hand this over to the Workers' Comp Advisory Council, and that is where it sits now for them to look at it.
Yeah, so you're just hoping that eventually you'll be able to get back to it. Is it possible that it'll be covered in some way under the mental health parity bill?
You know, I think that does open up some doors, because when we're talking about addressing mental health as health, I think that continues that conversation to extend to all these arenas that we're trying to address. I'm not optimistic that it's going to come out of the advisory council favorably, because I know how that particular system works. On the other hand, I think the counties and the cities who employ most of our first responders, they're working on a bolt-on insurance policy that hopefully by the end of the year they'll have in place that would cover these kind of claims.
Well, I hope so.
Yes.
Thank you for bringing that bill. Thank you for both coming on the show today. I appreciate it. Good stuff. Thank you for joining us for Tonight for Lawmakers. You can join the conversation on Facebook and Twitter at GPB News using the hashtag GPB Lawmakers. And also, don't forget to tune in tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. on your GPB station for Political Rewind, hosted by Bill Nigut. Join us tomorrow for Legislative Day 37. Have a good evening.